Hello to the viewers of OutOfThisBinary, it's Timmy, and this is part 2 of my WMEA project. This is the section about my narrative through pop music. So just like I did with the first video, I thought I would start with some glows and grows and just talk about how I feel like this project has been coming along over time. So I'm going to start with glows this time. I think this is the best part of my presentation thus far. I think it has the most engaging narrative. You're going to be hearing music samples in this presentation that are very grabbing. And I've really focused in and taken a lot of time to hone in on this narrative and honing in onto like an essence of being non-binary, and I really think it can help people that are cisgender or even binary trans to try to understand better like non-binary experience. I feel like this can be very helpful for these teachers, and yeah, and I've been really happy with the progress I've been making on this section, and I've been trying to like do some cuts and think about like what's really necessary to get across in this, and like trying to be more simple than too complex. Um, I put in a new section near the end of this where I ask reflective questions about developing my pedagogy with this information that I've discovered about myself. So that's kind of a new part for it, and I think there are great reflective questions and it's great concepts that I bring up regarding pedagogy. So my rooms for growing on this, I said on the last video, trying to think more about voice inflections when I'm talking, especially with this section because I feel like this section is a pretty intense one. I want to get more passionate in my voice at certain points and try to find really good points that I could probably pause at. Um, I'm also concerned that this is a pretty long section comparatively to the other two sections. Like, the other two after this are only 10 minutes, and this one's like 20 minutes. um, I think it still works in the long run, though, because I feel like I do have to take the time because this is like my vehicle for describing transgender experience. So, um, I'm also I like what I have written so far regarding the section about developing pedagogy, but I'm still very curious to see how my perspective on teaching will improve and how that certain part in in this um, in this pop music section, how that's going to be changing over time and how I'll keep improving on these ideas as I continue to gain more teaching experience. And yep, that's all I have to say on that. And let's get to the presentation. Again, please feel free to leave comments. Constructive critique would be great. If you think it was wonderful and amazing, you can tell me that too. So here we go.
Before I discovered my gender identity, I used to struggle with trying to understand the values we hold towards music in general and how these values relates to frameworks of understanding identity. If I were to narrow down what we can value in music and its relation to identity, I would narrow it down to these three ways. One way is through the composition. This is the external systemic value of musical identity regarding the set structures and foundations of a piece. Another way is through the performance. This is the internalized interpersonal value of musical identity, which is regarding interactions through behaviors with people and the audience. The final way is through understanding humanity. This is the internal individual value of musical identity, where we gather a glimpse of the emotions, truth, and meaning that music can evoke in composition and performance, and understanding a culture, community, other individuals, or even ourselves. I'm going to play this example for you, and I want you to be thinking about these three values in music. For me, what this music has meant in my lifetime, I consider this to be masculine music. The Game's Guitar Hero and Rock Band are out, Boys my age in 6th grade were coming around and discovering these classics again. School of Rock was out, and Jack Black was influential for the boys. There simply was masculine music in my lifetime. I grew up in the town Clarkson, Washington, on the east side of the state. It is a small town with many people who, yes, I would throw under the label redneck, which I say with loving affection. My male friends instead of my female friends were mostly enjoying this music. I really like this music as well, especially in the 6th grade. But now I'm going to play this example for you, and I want you to be thinking about those 3 values in music.
Special delivery, registered mail. You're gonna have to sign for this, buddy. Come on out there, you little sumbitch. I know you in there. Oh no! Goddamn little communist. I don't wanna get drafted. I don't wanna go. I don't wanna get
Gina, her little head clinking like a barrel of red velvet balls, full pass noise, Treatsville.
So, when I hear this example, I still hear this as rock music, it's just a little different and warped. I consider this to be overcompensated masculine music. This was 6th grade to about sophomore to junior year in college, and I was actually obsessive and eager to seek this kind of music actively, with an intense sensation it was what I needed. I absolutely loved it every time I found a band or a song that could fit under these categories. I brought several of these bands' albums, I watched their interviews every night before going to bed, I emulated the guitar playing styles and the ridiculous vocal stunts. I was really mesmerized and engulfed in the sound world. Looking at this music in terms of understanding humanity, there's a lot going on here. This music was a means for me of understanding community, culture, other individuals, and myself, if not directly through showing this music to people. If you're wondering how so, it's because gender made me feel different even from age 5. I was raised in a white, rich Catholic Republican family. I was in a very conservative hometown where there was limited queer visibility. Ever since age 5, I received constant harassment and instructions telling me how I expressed myself needed to change, and it wasn't falling under the appropriate set of norms for boyhood and manhood. Because of this degrading harassment and instructions, I turned to music. If there were to be one particular aspect of boyhood growing up in a manhood that I felt I didn't understand in my hometown, it was a male-centric sense of humor and those aspects of boyhood that were all about competitiveness and trying to win in a game and argument on who could make fun of whichever boys the most. I didn't necessarily hate this male sense of humor, I just couldn't express myself that way and be authentically myself. But it's kind of difficult to say though. I either couldn't express myself this way authentically because of how I felt internally, or because I was harassed, bullied, and redirected into believing that if my competitiveness, aggression, and sense of humor wasn't manifesting itself into the typical set of expressions in boyhood or manhood in my hometown, then there was something wrong with me. And since I had to keep my queer identity from my community for my safety, I needed to relate to the boys in order to socially pass and try to fit into those expected set of behaviors. So when I was discovering that kind of music you heard in the first sample, I heard that sense of humor, competitiveness, and aggression in boyhood. The timbres and tone colors used within the instrumentation from the first sample humorous, specifically emoting that sense of humor within the boys. The rhythm and beat to be competitive and aggressive, specifically emoting that sense of competitiveness and aggression within the boys. I hit puberty and I went through a short period where I started listening and enjoying this music in the first sample, but it was tough because music was what I loved. I didn't hate the music in the sample, I just understood this music as emoting qualities of boyhood I wasn't attaining and manifesting into the proper set of behaviors, and I was frustrated as towards why it wasn't doing the same for me. So when I transitioned towards music like what you hear in the second sample, I didn't realize at the time, but I was socializing myself to be like a boy by means of this overcompensation. Hearing and loving the ridiculous vocal stunts, deconstruction, sound effects, and the individuals making that kind of music that you heard in the second sample, I had more appreciation towards the values in the first sample that I felt were being emoted in the boys at that age, and regained a love towards that kind of music. Pushing myself to have more of those facets emoted inside of me through means of the second sample, I felt a more authentic communication with the boys. And there's a complicated disconnect in that my expressions towards them weren't authentic, but with this music spinning around in my head, I felt an authentic sense of identity, even if the expressions preceding that identity were contrived. And here's the complicated thing. I was always smart enough to notice the differences in these samples through analysis of composition and performance. I realized that the artists contributed in that music weren't necessarily making that music to construct an alternative masculine gender. I'm aware that you can have any gender identity and be a fan of this music. I've also been lucky to meet so many men in my life through music that have a very healthy sense of masculinity and sensitivity that generally don't make me feel this way as told through this music sample. And sitting here in the room absorbed with this interaction, I'm honestly hearing this music as being different from each other, just as I would have been years ago. But what's difficult for me to put towards all of you is that with my transgender experience, I go home for the day all by myself, not in the presence of anyone else, with only my body, and I completely struggle to hear a difference in these music samples. This is something I still struggle with to this age when I'm by myself. And this is because I was so unironically, non-absurdly, non-satirically, apolitically, and authentically using this music to make my outward expressions fit into that culture of boyhood I have associated with middle school and high school, that I completely forget the ironic, absurd, satirical, and political context of this music when I'm by myself. I forget that boys growing up didn't need that music in order to act like how they were acting. I forget that these expressions evoked in the music are atypical of the expressions of rock and roll around the same time period and aren't working to the same emotional means of the expressions of the first sample. I can analyze in a clear-cut way the compositions and performance, but because of who I am internally and individually, my perception trumps over my analysis of the external and internalized. No amount of musical training has ridden of this perception I hold on to, and honestly, this is how I came to understand my difference in gender identity from others. And honestly, even though I'm settled on this internal perception of the music, I'm still left to question if this perception would have been shaped if the harassment, bullying, and constant redirection were minimized in my lifetime. But now I'm going to play this example for you, and again, I want you to be thinking about these three values of music.
Some blues collide. The bed's too big, the frying pan's too wide. He believes in beauty. He's Venus as a boy. He believes. Inside a boy, I found a universe, and in his eyes are 1,000 stars on a dark sky.
So, when I hear this example, what I hear is absolutely gorgeous pop music. This was junior year of high school all throughout college, and again to that same level of obsession as I did with that second music sample. Intense sensation that I needed this music, I bought several albums, watched several interviews and music videos, and emulated their performances on guitar and vocals. I often got down on myself for listening to this and knocked it down in the presence of others. I could say some of the vocal timbre sound forced and the romantic themes evoked are trite, but really when I go home at the end of the day, I'm still going to hear it as something beautiful, gorgeous, and emotionally resonant with me, and my self-conscious analytical comments won't matter. In terms of understanding, there's a lot of complexity going on here. There's a part of me that wishes I could tell you this was the music obsession that proved me my identity as a trans woman, how I slowly left the racket of the second sample and became true with myself. I mean, I emphasized in my first writing that I had published for a magazine. I came to realize that the music is often overtly and literally feminine, especially the music of Kate Bush. Her lyrical topics often deal with motherhood, pregnancy, womanly sexual experience, and yes, even menstruation. I would like to say the childlike choir girl vocal timbres of some of these singers are emotionally resonant with me because it harks back to my feelings of femininity in early childhood. I would like to tell you that I empathize with the lyrical themes about female anatomy because that's what I wanted for myself. And I wish I could tell you it just like that because it's simple and there's an inkling of truth in every one of those statements. But the bigger picture isn't that at all. It wasn't about changing body parts for me. The bigger picture is way more complicated. It was about trying to get myself socialized, helping me understand people better, and it's because I love music. This music came to me at a time where I was becoming a drum major and student leader, and I knew my performance as a man was getting stale and insincere. I needed to appear more engaged with the students. I needed a solution to balance it out with a second music sample that possibly came as a result of the constant harassment, bullying, and redirection. I collected this music in the third sample. Hearing that many of the stylistics were also over the top and unique, I easily adapted, and they happened to be female singers. It traveled through me in time where I was late in my high school experience, and having dated no one, I was in a weird emotional in-between romantically, and the music sample was serving many purposes for me. By listening to this music, I felt I could grasp a perspective on what it means to be a woman, go on a date with one, and use her to hide my true sexuality. Yet I knew I was going to be leaving for college soon, and feeling numb from my performance and conditioning as a man, I needed help in redeveloping a desire towards romance and relationships for the men I was attracted to. So this music actually brought me so much confidence in my sexuality and romance. These are women that taught me how to be brave, radically vulnerable, and defiant. Aside from a lot of the wonderful music in band class, a lot of this music was what was bringing me to college and encouraged me to study music, and I still listen to this music often in the third sample, and I'm really proud of it. I have no shame that this is the music bringing me to college. And being trans, I've had struggles with perceptions as to what my body is, and it's no coincidence that these lyric subjects would be directly singing about those parts of female anatomy. With that being said, I learned the songs by ears, I recorded and covered the songs. I had a wide vocal range, so I could sing the ranges and melody lines of the sample. I could participate in these private fantasies of mine by living through the music, and it felt like survival for me, and I feel if I allowed the space for a visual fantasy of myself in a woman's body, my mental health wouldn't have maintained. I'm not sure if I would have been living anymore. So completely immersing myself in these auditory fantasies of both the overcompensated masculine sample and the overcompensated feminine sample was how I constructed my imagination and dealt with my gender dysphoria. And it's no wonder that the first time I was hearing people step up, raise their hands, and say, "Oh yeah, I know that artist and love her," was in my first trans and queer support group. What appeared to me as music without any relevant communities was actually music that informed a trans community that was waiting for me with support and open arms. And again, as much as I love this music and completely settled on this internal perception of the music, I'm still left to question if this perception would have been shaped if the harassment, bullying, and constant redirection were minimized in my lifetime. This music was everywhere in my life outside of the classroom, but I was also very involved with music inside the classroom and in extracurricular activities. I was in wind ensemble, jazz ensemble, pep band, and marching band. As extracurriculars, I started a saxophone quartet, I played in music ministry at church, and played lead guitar in a rock band. There was a complicated relationship between this music I liked and the music I was actually performing. The pros in this relationship was that no one in any of my ensembles discouraged my music choices. With many of these music selections falling under the category of progressive rock, it encouraged me to successfully attempt levels of technical virtuosity that nothing else was pushing me towards, which really helped me in these ensembles. When I would talk about my music interests with my band director and other knowledgeable musicians, the discussion would usually broaden me into other musical groups and genres. But there's also cons in the relationship. No one discouraged me from my music choices, but no one encouraged me either. Few people I would bring my favorite groups to simply didn't understand or relate to what could personally be valued in this music. No one could understand that I felt a need for this music to survive, and that any redirection to steer my interest away from this music would be futile. Because of this, I didn't have space to culturally participate with this music and extracurricular ensembles of mine. While the music selections encouraged technical virtuosity, It also fostered a bad habit of neglecting proper tone and intonation development on my saxophone. With this experience has come reflective questions over developing my pedagogy and what I want to do as a high school band teacher. One of my goals as a teacher is to foster diverse technique and musical participation. So often I have heard kids that are highly musical outside of an academic setting decide not to join band or other music ensembles because they do not want to lose their own personal style and approach to music. I've never had this view myself for academic settings, but I just do not believe in creating technique or to replace other techniques that serves other musical styles or participations, but instead to create a wide palette of technique for multiple musical purposes. I believe that when we refine technique, we are refining how we communicate, and that students can reach a greater clarity with how we communicate and what we want to communicate in all musical settings. As I enter into teaching, I will be asking myself the questions: how do I validate and allow for growth for music both inside and outside of the classroom? Can I allow for a place where everyone feels like they can participate with their music cultures? While I care about this cultural validation, I am also aware of the developed norms and ideals of a wind ensemble or jazz ensemble that I want to live up to. Thus, I also ask myself the practical question: when is the technical barrier a result of underdeveloped ability, a result of an ingrained difference in perception or expectation of approaching the technique, or both? While the answers to these questions will continue to develop as I gain more teaching experience, there are ideas I have as a beginning teacher. Near the beginning of the year, I would like to hand out student questionnaire sheets asking about favorite musicians outside of the specific ensemble's genre and musicians inside the specific ensemble's genre. I would like to allow for a maximum of 5 artists for each and a minimum of not having to list any if they don't know of anybody. For each artist, I would like for them to provide me with one song or piece so I can take the time to actually listen to them and think about where they are coming from in their musical background. As I continue to get to know my students better, I would like to allow for students to do arranging projects for groups and to listen for ideas about musical groups that could be in the band program. One class that I would like to create in my band program would be a guitar class. This would be an important outreach for a lot of students, both the students that like band and want to try a new instrument, the student leaders good at guitar, and students not very involved with band. I believe rock and folk music are becoming an important piece of music history now that deserves attention in the classroom. Involving ourselves with the music community outside of class will be crucial. Finding the time for a field trip with the band for musical events, as well as allowing the space for performing ensembles to visit our school. As far as addressing the development of technique, I believe in having many different ways to address a technical barrier until I find a way that works for connecting with my students. Sometimes it helps to address actual development of ability, but other times it can be very beneficial to address this on a perceptive emotional level. Oftentimes it takes doing both. As I address development of technique, I like the idea of using language that addresses differences between music inside of class and outside of class, especially for the students in multiple ensembles and groups with many eclectic music tastes. As I've often heard band teachers say, there are differences between classical music, jazz, and pop ideals of dynamics, tone, and articulation. This knowledge is valuable, and in using this language, I aim to find approaches that validates all these musical communications. When I explain the difference or reasoning for why we want to approach a technique in a certain way over another, it will not be for the purpose of replacing other valuable techniques, but instead broadening the palette and engaging in the questions of the how, what, why we musically communicate in a certain way for certain contexts.